Hey everyone, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and I go over 1 or 2 stories a week. They're always true stories. Sometimes have mysterious elements, but they always have one miracle, sometimes more than that. So if you like true stories and you like good, happy endings, listen along. You may like it. Our story today is about a man named Dennis. He was 30 years old. He was married. His wife's name was Rose. She was 29 years old, and they had a little 3-year-old boy. Now, Rose was 9 months pregnant. Everything had gone great. Great appointment checkups, no complications. So they were excited to just welcome their second child into the world. In August of 1978, the delivery day, it was finally here. So Dennis, he was ecstatic. He could not wait. So they went up to the hospital. Doctors, nurses started doing their thing, preparing, all that good stuff. And what would come next? Dennis would never forget. As the doctors are doing their prep and getting everything ready for the delivery, the main doctor comes over to Dennis, and this all occurred actually out in the hallway. I guess back then, sometimes in the 70s, maybe the men waited outside, whereas now today you see a lot of times they're all together in the same delivery room. But this happened, of course, he was out in the hall, and the doctor spoke to him, and he just said, "Look, Dennis, I'm really, really sorry, but your baby died." Dennis was taken back. He was shocked. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't understand. How could his baby be dead when it wasn't even born yet? That's the thoughts that was starting to go through his mind. And the doctor proceeded to explain, "Look, we have hooked up 2 different fetal monitors to Rose. We left them going for at least 5 minutes each, and not one time did we hear a heartbeat. We're sorry to say this, but your baby's gone." Dennis kind of collapsed, back into those old plastic chairs out in the hospital hallways, and he was beside himself. He didn't even know still what to think. And, a little backstory too, Dennis had just finished his 3rd year of his doctoral studies at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And he was working towards his PhD in English. He had accepted a job, and it was going to be as a public information officer at Manchester University in North Manchester, Indiana. They were planning, after the baby had been delivered, they'd, move, get settled, he'd start his new job, and, of course, still working towards his PhD. But now, what was going to happen? So he asked the doctor before the doctor walked off. He said, "Well, doctor, what do we do next?" He didn't understand, what the procedure was, because Rose hadn't delivered yet. The infant was still inside her tummy. So he wanted to know, what's next? And the reply he got, it was very offensive to Dennis. And he said that the doctor, when he said what I'm about to say, it sounded like memorized, a little bit robotic, like he had said this one too many times, and it was just here's another one, yada, yada, yada there, kind of without compassion. And what he had said was that first he needed to go in the room and tell his wife about the baby, that basically there is no baby now. And the most offensive part was when he told Dennis that within about 5 hours or so, they'll need to do a prep so that they can extract the body. Well, extract the body really offended Dennis, and I can understand why. I mean, that was his child. Extract the body. Couldn't he have used better tone? Number one. Number two, just some different terms, right? But anyway, so that just left Dennis, even more perturbed. And Dennis, he dreaded going in there. He didn't want to have to tell Rose. So he tried to stall as much as he could. He went to a payphone and he called his parents who lived back up in Michigan so they could be aware of what was going on. They were distraught with the news and they told him, we are going to get our bags, hop in the car, and we will be there ASAP. That's what they told him, but it was going to be about a 6-hour drive before they could get there. But they were on their way nonetheless. So Dennis, meanwhile, he hangs up the phone with them and he's still trying to work up his nerve to go into that room, but he finally does. And as soon as Rose sees him, she knows right away something's very, very wrong. And she spoke up first. She said, something's wrong with the baby, isn't it? And I mean, she kind of already had like a feeling because the doctors and nurses running everywhere. And every time she tried to ask them something, they'd kind of avoid it. They wouldn't tell her anything because they were waiting for Dennis to come do it. But she knew something was very wrong. She didn't know that the baby was gone. She just thought something was very wrong and whatever that might be, like, I don't know, maybe a disease or something. Dennis spoke up and he told her it was hard. He had to get the nerve up and get the words out. You know, he kind of was just like, they don't know why, but the baby's gone. And he told her about the monitors and everything with no heartbeat. And they both just kind of collapsed into each other's arms and they were sobbing and crying and upset. And I can't imagine what that must have felt like. And Rose, she just immediately felt all that agony and pain that her husband had already started to feel out in the hallway. You know, just seeing him and hearing all that, it just came upon her suddenly, and she felt that. Now, a few of her church friends had arrived. A lady, one of the friends from church, was named Sandy Scott, and she wanted to help take Rose down to the chapel to say a prayer. And on the way down, as they're walking to the chapel, she kind of just says, look, surely God has a purpose for allowing this to have happened. But when you're the one that it's happening to, you know, right away, that's sometimes just not what you want to hear, right? Because you can't fathom why he would let that happen. But, you know, in the moment, you know, Sandy was trying to be kind and, you know, they took it with a grain of salt and were, that what else can you do? Dennis overheard her saying that and he kind of got annoyed a little bit. You know, here he was, a Vietnam veteran. He had seen many friends die in the war. But he was thinking, at least they served a purpose. They were doing something good, you know, by serving. And he thought, my baby never had a chance because it wasn't ever given the chance to be born yet. So he just couldn't understand. He was trying every which way to understand it, and he just couldn't. No matter those feelings, Dennis still prayed for strength mentally and physically because he knew he would have to be there for Rose and his other 3-year-old child. Pretty soon thereafter, he's already donning on those old green scrubs, like they have like kind of in the movies. Because you got to remember, this is 1978. So he's putting those on. He's getting ready for the procedure, the quote unquote extraction. He's getting ready and he's going in there. He sits at the head of the bed next to his wife's head. And he's just, being kind. And he's just thinking all these thoughts. He starts to think of like, man, God, I wish I could take my child's place. I wish. I'd do it in a heartbeat. And as soon as he starts thinking those thoughts, he hears an inner voice. And that inner voice said, now you understand how it feels. Now, Dennis knew right away what that meant, and it hit him hard. And he had never really thought of it like that. He thought of the sacrifice God had made in giving his only son to die on the cross for his sins. For the first time, it kind of clicked. And he was like, wow. He had never thought of it like that before. Meanwhile, the medical staff, nurses and doctors are already getting their instruments and starting to do their thing to get the baby out. 15 minutes go by. And immediately, all of a sudden, Dennis hears the doctor say, that's impossible. Well, that kind of makes Dennis want to listen like, What's going on? Well, the nurse proceeds to say, that baby just wet on you. She's talking to the doctor, and they both talk to each other, and they're like, you can't have bodily functions if you're not alive. Oh my goodness. So they immediately get to work. I mean, scrambling. And Dennis is watching and listening. And at the time, too, Rose was so exhausted, from the whole thing. She wasn't even aware, really, of what was going on. She was kind of out of it. But Dennis wasn't. He watched as the doctor placed his baby, and he saw that it was a baby girl. So the doctor placed the baby girl into a little table and starts working on her right away, putting a tube down her throat and squirting the air just to inflate her lungs to try to get her breathing better. Well, he instructed the nurse to take over, and he made another one go call a Dr. Jasper. And 2 minutes later, there were more doctors and nurses bursting into the room. They had to tell Dennis, look, we've got to work. We need to concentrate. You're going to have to go outside into the hallway. But before he did, they told him, we are going to have to get an ambulance to take your baby girl, that said, to Riley Children's Hospital, because at Children's Hospital, they'd be better equipped to handle this situation. So that's what was going to have to happen. But in the meantime, they were going to work doing their thing to try to keep this baby alive. Also, as he was about to walk out to go out into the hallway, he noticed a nurse. A bunch of commotion going on. One nurse walks over to the little registry book, and she had already earlier written stillborn. But he saw her cross that out, and right next to it, she puts Miracle of God in the registry book. When I read that, going through this story, it gave me chills. I was like, oh my gosh. And, the nurses instructed Dennis, look, obviously, you can see the baby's alive, but she has a very, very faint heartbeat. So we need to concentrate, work on her, get her transferred, and we're going to do our best. So Dennis goes out into the hallway. You've got some of the church friends there and whatnot. He tells them what went on. So they start jumping up and down, rejoicing. They're happy and excited. And Dennis is just kind of still confused by all the commotion, but he's still excited too. So about an hour later, a doctor comes out of the room and he starts to talk to Dennis. And he says, look, I don't believe in miracles, but medical science cannot explain what happened just inside that room. I can't explain it. So that was, kind of interesting. I wonder, to this day, does that doctor, if he's still living, does he now believe in miracles? I sure hope so. Dennis takes the 90-minute car ride to get all the way over to the Children's Hospital. Meanwhile, in the ambulance, there were 2 trauma nurses that were taking the infant to the Children's Hospital, and they were taking turns doing the duties of pushing air down the little girl's lungs. Well, for the next 12 days, Dennis went every afternoon to the hospital to visit his baby girl. Meanwhile, Rose was still back at the other hospital for about 10 more days because she really had to recover because she had lost a lot of blood, all that kind of stuff. So she just needed time to recoup. But he went there every day, and every day his little girl got a little bit stronger and a little bit more. And by day 2, she was already breathing on her own. And I think it said about a week out, she was already drinking a bottle. So after day 10, when Rose is released from the hospital, for the next 2 days, she goes with Dennis over to the Children's Hospital both days to visit her baby girl. And on that 12th day, she was able to go home with her folks, and they named her Jeanette. So, of course, there's a lot of celebration and happiness for quite a while. But after that kind of calms down and everything's getting back into the normal flow of life, Dennis started having these thoughts. They were thoughts of bitterness, because while he was so thankful and grateful that his little girl made it, he just couldn't understand, why did God allow him and Rose to go through that, to experience that? Why? He thought, was it some kind of sick joke? He's like, God doesn't do that. So why? He just could not get it through his head. And that happened on and off for about a year. And it said about a year later, they were going to their family doctor appointment. And this particular family doctor, they loved. She was the best. And she was actually pregnant 9 months with a little boy. So they were excited for her. And they had gone to her for several years as a family doctor. So they were used to her. It came time for one of their checkups. And when they went in, they had heard the news that the doctor's little boy had passed away. And what had happened is the umbilical cord had accidentally wound its way in the womb around its neck. And so the little infant boy was I think it said he only lived about 9 hours after being born and then passed away due to complications. So when they heard the news, they were just beside themselves. They just were so upset for her. And in fact, I want to say it said that they were showing up for an appointment, but that actually doesn't make sense. They might have been told on the phone, because why would they show up for an appointment if she wasn't there? Because here's what happened. The staff had told Dennis and Rose that the doctor was closing her practice, that she had fallen into this deep, dark depression. She just couldn't get out of it. She didn't want to work anymore, and she was closing the practice. So it might have been on the phone because of that piece of information. But anyway, that really saddened Dennis and his wife. And Dennis was like, oh man, we really, really loved her. So he had a thought. He was going to write her a letter. In the letter, he explained to a T how she was feeling, the doctor, because he had felt a lot of those same feelings when him and his wife went through what they did. So he talked about in the letter how, feelings of hollowness, you feel useless, lonely, sad. But then he also explained in the letter that you also feel bitterness and anger, just frustrated overall. And he's talked about all those things, but he also talked about love, having a purpose, and service. And in conclusion, he wrote to the doctor, I know why I had to be hurt so severely a year ago. It was so I'd be able to talk to you. And Dennis explained at the end how she was such a great doctor. Him and his wife and family needed her, as well as many other families that saw her as their doctor. She was excellent at what she did. She had a purpose. She was useful, and that she just had to come back and open her practice back up. Well, 2 days passed, and that doctor gave Dennis a call on the phone. And she said, you were the only one I would listen to. No one else understood. And because of your letter, I have decided I'm going back to my career as a physician. So, my goodness, that's crazy to think about. But anyway, finishing up the story here, years passed, and at the time this was written in this miracle book, Dennis was now in his 60s, and him and his wife and children had had a happy life. That doctor, she did go back into practice, and she practiced for several decades before she retired. Dennis's daughter, Jeanette, she's also thriving. She's a working mom. She works as a school teacher, has 2 kiddos of her own. She's married, and they live in Elkhart, Indiana. It did say when Jeanette was 32 years old, she had to have a pacemaker, probably due to complications from, in the womb and all. But other than that, she's healthy and happy. What a story. Man, oh man. It just really, pushes that point of how we can all go there and feel those feelings when something terrible happens in our lives. And we're like, dadgummit, why did that have to happen, right? And you don't see it. Sometimes you don't see it for a week, for a month, sometimes for years. But there's always a reason for it. And we're blinded. I know I've had those times where I'm blinded when something terrible happens and you just can't even fathom why. But then you see later on why, like in the story, Dennis, he had those bitter thoughts for a year. He was angry when it happened. He had no idea why would God do it. But then he found out a year later why he had to go through all that pain, because he was able to help that doctor. Who knows what would have happened with her depression if that had not happened that way, or if she would have gone back into practice. It just changes life so much. I mean, there's all these things that could have happened or wouldn't have happened. You know what I mean? You just kind of see the beauty of it at the end of this story anyway. So it's just, wow, it's intriguing. And I thought it's important to talk about that. I really hope you guys liked this one. I think it just nailed a few things home for me. I know it did. Just reminding me of why some things can happen in my life when I just don't understand. But then I understand later on, just kind of like in the story. So anyway, I hope you guys liked it and perhaps learned something too. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and give me a comment. Tell me what you thought about the story, or did it make you realize something maybe in your life that you'd like to share?